So you finally ponied up and bought the Sekonic 758 Cine. Congrats, it's worth every penny. But you're not going to get the most out of it until you start to create and use some custom profiles. When you create a custom profile, not only will you calibrate your meter, but you'll also be able to see the exposure range of your particular camera directly on your meter. Until now, Sekonic's software has been a little frustrating to use for us cinematographers. The software and the tutorials have all been geared around photographers. It's my desire to show you, the cinematographer, how to create your own custom profile for use in this meter, as well as use the latest version of the software, DTS version 3. I'm also creating a library of profiles that you're welcome to download directly from my site. And with that, let's get started. The first thing you need to do is to light a reference chart. You can use any of the following charts: the exposure profile target, exposure profile target 2, or one of the X-Rite color checker targets. I recommend the exposure profile target 2, as it's big enough to light evenly and it requires the fewest number of exposures. If you're using one of the other charts, check out the user guide to get the exact number of exposures needed to create your profile. The first step in creating a reliable profile is to make sure you are in a controlled environment with some space in it. A room without any windows or your garage would be a good place to shoot the chart. Now that you have a location that's free from stray light hitting the chart, you'll want to light the chart evenly from side to side. The light should not vary in value more than 1/10 of one stop. But before you start lighting the chart, you have to decide the level that the chart will be lit at. I recommend lighting the chart to the middle of the exposure range of the lens. This should be somewhere in the T4 to T8 range. If the lens can open up and close down 3 stops from the middle of the lens, you'll be setting yourself up well for this test. If you use 1K area open face lights or a couple of Diva lights, you should have more than enough light to expose the chart at just about any light level. The closer the lights are to the chart, the more you're going to have to diffuse them to prevent any hot spots on the chart. So back the lights up as far as possible. Here's an overhead diagram of the lighting setup that I use to create my profiles. As you can see here, the lights are placed about 45 degrees off axis from the camera, and they're about the same height as the chart. I used 2 Arri 1K open face lights in this example, but I've also used Kinos, Tweenies, and LEDs. If your lights are putting out too much light for your given exposure, and you cannot back them up any further in your location, drop a scrim or a net in front of each light to get to the proper level. Alternatively, you could also use ND gel. Whatever you do, I do not recommend dimming the light, as that can introduce a color temperature shift in the light. While in practice, I haven't found that dimming the light is too detrimental to creating a profile. It's best to be as stringent as possible and introduce the least number of variables. Now that the chart is lit evenly, it's time to take 2 final measurements. With the sphere of the meter extended, take a meter reading at the center of the chart and note that reading. Now from the camera position, take a spot meter reading of the center chip and notate that value. These 2 readings will vary slightly. That's normal. Taking these 2 readings is what allows you to calibrate your meter with the software, so that when you use the profile, the spot meter and the incident meter will line up. If you can, it's best to get the chart full frame. It shouldn't be less than half of the frame to get decent results. As you can see in this example, it's not always possible to get the chart fully framed up. In this case, if I moved the camera any closer, the shadow of the camera started to encroach on the chart, so I got it as close as I possibly could. Now it's finally time to take your exposures. As you take your exposures, it's very important to document everything. Document, document, document. Oh, and in case I forgot to mention it, document everything. White balance, shutter angle, shooting frame rate, project frame rate, aperture, exposure index, any profile settings, lens, and clip number. The first exposure you take should be at exposure, or 0 EV. From there you'll need to take 6 more exposures at the following values: plus and minus 3 EV, plus and minus 4 EV, and plus or minus 8 EV. If I'm using a lens that allows me to open up and close down 3 EVs in each direction, then I'll shoot these exposures first. Next I'll shoot the minus and plus 4 EV by adjusting the shutter. Exposing at minus and plus 8 EV can be a bit more tricky. You'll need to adjust the aperture, shutter, frame rate, and possibly add ND. There are 2 parameters that you need to keep consistent: the project frame rate and the exposure index. These 2 parameters should not change at any time during these 7 exposures, or you will have an invalid profile. Each exposure only needs to be a second long. Any longer and you're just wasting space. Here's an example of the exposures I took using the Canon C300 with a chart that was lit to T8 at EI 800. You'll want to pause the video here, as it won't be on screen long enough to read through. That'd just be way too long and too boring. Now that I have my 7 exposures, I can go to my computer and copy my files to begin creating the profile for my meter. The first thing to do is to back the footage up. If you do not have 3 separate copies of the footage, you do not have it backed up properly. I copied my footage to 2 separate internal drives and 1 external drive. So far this has all been straightforward, and here's where it can get confusing. To create a profile with the Sekonic software, you need to have a still image. Even with version 3 of DTS, it does not ingest video files. So you need to get 1 still frame out of every clip. While the Sekonic software reads both JPEGs and TIFFs, I've had better success with JPEGs for some reason. Not all flavors of TIFFs play nicely with the Sekonic software, so if you're having trouble with your TIFFs, then export a JPEG and you'll be fine. To get your still images from the movie clip, use your editor or program of choice. Final Cut, Premiere, Redsyn EX, and even Photoshop are good choices. Although I recommend using Photoshop or Premiere, as I have found them to be the most flexible and reliable. Something very important to keep an eye out for when exporting your still images from your editor is to watch out for the introduction of any gamma shifts created by the editor. Final Cut 7 was known for introducing gamma shifts in the footage, so be cautious if using this editor. I haven't had this problem with Premiere, so you can feel confident using it. Let me show you how I create my stills using Premiere. This process should be similar, regardless of what editor or program you choose to use. First, launch Premiere and import your clips. Don't worry about the sequence settings, just skip that part and go straight to importing. Once open, you'll go to File, Import, to import your clips, and navigate to where your clips are stored on your hard drive. As soon as the clips are loaded, click on the first clip and load it into the viewer. Click on the camera icon to export out a still frame. When the dialog pops up, rename the still with the camera settings in the file name, and then save it in the TIFF or JPEG format. The file name should have the camera, exposure index, aperture, frame rate, shutter, and profile used. I'll also add the EV value, just to help me keep it all straight. Repeat this process for every exposure. Once it's complete, close Premiere and organize all these stills. You'll want to have 2 folders, one for the normal range and one for the extended range. The normal range should hold the +3, -3, and 0 EV stills. Extended range should hold the +& -8, +& -4, and 0 EV stills. Now launch the DTS software. From the main screen, choose the Create Profile from the Profile menu and select the Advanced mode. For a camera like the Alexa with a dynamic range of more than 10 stops, you'll need to choose the Extended mode on the left-hand side of the screen, and then choose the target you used. In my case, the Profile Target 2, and click Next. Now choose Ambient. After clicking Next, be sure to click the option to turn the Cine mode on. This will open up options and values that we cinematographers are used to dealing with. Now input the EI value that was metered at the very start of the profiling process. Here I'll input 800, as that's what I put on my meter. Now I'll input the readings that I metered the chart at. Frame rate is 23.98. Angle, 180. For incident, the reading was 5.6 and 9/10. And now I'll update the information from the reflected reading. Frame rate was 23.98, angle 180. The reading was 8.0 and 3/10. This is the part of the process that enables the meter to correctly calibrate itself. And of course, click Next. Now a window will open up and you'll need to navigate to where you place your still images. The program will load your files, and this is where you need to input the exposure data. If you named your clips with the exposure info, then it's easy to get the info you need. Otherwise, refer back to your notes and make sure you're inputting the correct values. For a shutter angle of 360 degrees, choose 358, as that is the closest option. At that level, a difference of 2 degrees is not going to affect your exposure by a noticeable amount. For any exposure where you use an ND filter, you need to adjust another value to compensate. So adjust the shutter, frame rate, or aperture accordingly. The next screen tells the software where the chart is and the image so that it can find and process the correct chips. Click on each image and align the green marks accordingly. I recommend starting with one of the brighter images, as it will be the easiest to see. Since the camera should not be moving, after you've aligned the first image, It should be a quick click on the rest of the images to ensure proper alignment. If you need to fine-tune any of them, and they're hard to see, use the brightness preview to lighten the image. As soon as you click the next button, the program goes to work evaluating the chart. If you get an alert message like the one seen here about the set level not existing, just click OK and continue on. I haven't found this to be a real issue when creating a profile. The software is just telling you that it didn't match the default values. So just double check your results. This alert message will usually only appear when working with cameras that shoot in RAW or a log-based profile. When it's done processing, it will give you a chart graphing the exposure range of the camera. The outer red marks represent the absolute limits of the camera's ability to record details in the highlights and shadows. The inner green marks represent when the camera is beginning to show signs of either digital clipping in the highlights or noise in the shadows. These values are based off the software's internal processing of the image and compared to the default values supplied by Sekonic. If you do not agree with these settings, the midpoint, the clipping point, and the dynamic range values can all be adjusted to better suit your requirements. Just slide any of the markers to where you want them, and the numbers will adjust accordingly. What I like about this chart and the arrows is that the red and green arrows directly correspond to the arrows on the bottom of the display in your meter. So what you adjust here will be adjusted on the meter. Once you're happy, click the Save button, and down drops a window to name your file. Enter a name and press OK. The graph closes and you'll see a list of your profiles on the left side of the window. Now it's time to connect your meter via the USB cable and turn it on. Once it is on, the software will recognize and display the current profiles in the meter. To load a profile into one of these three slots, first select the desired profile from the list on the left and select the profile position you want to load it into. Then click the double arrow button between the two to transfer the profile into that position. Repeat this for each position. Finally, at the bottom of the screen, press the Transfer to Light Meter button, and it will load all three profiles into your meter. And that's all there is to it. You now have a custom camera profile, as well as a calibrated meter. I've been creating a library on my site of profiles that you're welcome to download and use. I've also included the source files, so if you want to play around with them, have at it. Be sure to check back periodically as I continue to update my library as I get access to cameras. If you like this tutorial, feel free to check out others that I have available at thecinematographerseries.com or on ryanewalters.com. And until next time, get out there and shoot.